Hi, today we're going to talk about something called the Shibboleth schema. Our discussion today is about intergroup dialect differences and how those dialect differences can be used to favor certain groups over other groups and how power is involved in this notion of dialect differences. So let's talk about intergroup dialects. Intergroup, when people understand each other well enough to kind of handle their everyday objectives, they can do business, they can make plans together, they can form friendships, all the different things you need to be able to do to handle your everyday objectives. It's said that you share a common dialectic. When dialectics have unequal social value, their use often plays a role in social discrimination. So different groups will have different dialects, and when there is clear unequal social value between those, that the dialect itself can be used in social discrimination. And speech dialect differences may be blamed both by underdogs and favorites for communication problems and social discrimination between the groups. So the favorites can say, well, if they just learned how to talk correctly, meaning like us, then then everything will be fine. And in the same sense, and that's the problem. They don't care to speak correctly, so that's why we can't give them jobs. That's why we can look down at them as uneducated or whatever the case might be, or non-sophisticated, whatever the case might be. And in the same sense, the underdogs could say, the way you talk in quite in a number of different aspects with regards to your dialect is something that is offensive to us, or that you use that against us. So intergroup dialect tension and discrimination is very widespread, and dialects carry unequal social status in ways that correspond to the status of all speakers, meaning that this dialectical tensions between groups in the way that they speak is extremely widespread and around the globe. We see this, and we've seen this over basically the recorded history. So let me give you an example of how we've seen this in recorded history. So the example Hopper uses comes from the Shibboleth tale. The Shibboleth tale is in the Bible in Judges 12:46. I know many of you probably feel your kind of have a strong background in the Bible, so many of you, I'm sure, have a good understanding of what this tale accounts for, but we'll kind of talk through it just no matter for those of you that might not be as familiar. So the Shibboleth tale deals with the Gileadites and the Ephraimites, and the issue came when there was a war between these two groups, and the Gileadites won. So the Gileadites won, and they set it up so that there was kind of a narrow passage through to Jordan. And what they did was, when people came through that passage, they basically said, "Art thou an Ephraimite? Ephraimite? Ephraimite?" I have a hard time saying that word, and I've spelt it incorrectly here. But so, "Art thou an Ephraimite?" Person would say, "Nay, no, I'm not." They'd say, "Well, say now Shibboleth." The person would then say, if they were Ephraimite, they'd say Sibboleth, because they could not make the sh sound in their culture. So they'd say Sibboleth. And then they took them and slew them, and there were 42,000 people that they killed that way. One of those lovely Bible stories that we're all very familiar with. So that, in that sense, it's a schema. So shibboleth schemas are biases in listening habits that the listener, right? The listener has a sense of, I am biased to hear things said this way. So for instance, I come from the western United States. People call me Yankee, but I actually come from area that's actually more south than where people live in Arkansas. But it's in the western United States. And when I hear a dialect from a very strong dialect from the South, I have a natural bias against that. I feel as though people are speaking overly loud and overly abrasive in their tones when they get really loud and and it has a twang to it, and it's actually in a sense offensive to my hearing, the way I'm used to listening. And that's how shibboleth schemas work, in the sense that the listeners themselves have a bias in hearing other people's communication. I'll give you another one. So in the West, we would never say that somebody had a picture made. We would say that they have a picture taken. We wouldn't say people are going to put something up unless, in fact, they are going to put it up high. We would say they're going to put something away. These are just natural speaking tones. We would say, there's a difference between the use of the word whenever. And then of Western dialect, we would use the word whenever, meaning at any point. So whenever I go here, which means I'm going to go there a number of different times, or whenever, meaning at what point you would do something. So whenever you get to deciding that you want to move forward with this plan, give me a call. People in the South use whenever, meaning when. So they'll say things like, whenever I first came to A State, right, that's a one-time event. We would, in the West, say, well, no, whenever is not appropriate there. It's when I first came to A State. So it's these types of biases by a listener, right, that can then be held against the speaker, right? And this is a common thing that happens within, different parts of the United States with different types of accents. Middle-class speakers are not likely to be penalized for using non-standard dialect features. And so if we say this in the sense that, if a middle-class person goes, I eat, right, instead of saying all right, they say I eat, right? People go, oh, well, that's a purposeful use of non-standard language. If I say, yeah, I ain't going to do that, right? It's a purposeful use of non-standard language. So middle-class speakers are going to get the benefit of the doubt that they're doing things purposefully. Those of you that have studied a good amount of communication, we have communication accommodation theory and also communication expectation theory, communication expectancy theory. And expectancy theory is that we expect people to speak a certain way, but if we consider them to be highly credible and we hear violations of our expectancies, we'll actually see those things as more favorable. The person's trying to be cool, or they're trying to be, they're trying to relate to us more closely, or they're trying to be interesting in a sense. But if somebody is of a lower status, we see those violations as signs of that person's incompetence. So what shibboleth schemas do is they perform the social discrimination in the context of intergroup hostility. So if fellow middle-class speakers can kind of break the rules and it's okay, but when it happens to when it's a situation with intergroup, right, where one group is perceiving as listening to another group, right, that can then lead to social discrimination through, a perception of somebody who is incompetent or within their language use. So shibboleth schemas, one of the key things is that shibboleths will shift with cultural adaptation. And the differences only become important in the context of intergroup hostility. Now, when I say they'll shift with cultural adaptation, if you think about it, right, if one of the Ephraimites said, okay, our people are getting slaughtered because they can't say shibboleth. So I'm going to now start a school, and I'm going to have all the Ephraimites come to me, and I'm going to teach them for $5 to say shibboleth, so they won't be slaughtered. And so we start teaching the Ephraimites how to say shibboleth. An Ephraimite walks up to the passage. They say shibboleth. The person says shibboleth. and they think, man, I could think this is an Ephraimite, but they were able to say Shibboleth. Should we all just trust that now anybody who can say Shibboleth is an Ephraimite, or should we maybe start working on developing maybe a new Shibboleth we're going to use, a new test we're going to use? And so in that sense, we see that new differences are identified and tests and tests enacted. This happens across the board with these hostile intergroup situations where the groups will actually start developing new models to be able to enact um, the types of hostilities that they're looking to do, and to create the discriminatory models that they want. So, and it says here that the most vicious Shibboleth schemers may be the most recent converts. And we can think of like somebody who stopped smoking, will be incensed when anybody is smoking around them. And the similar thing goes with regards to people who adapt their speech from one culture to another. And the first place we saw this most dramatically was, African Americans started speaking more European American in their language. So they adopted more kind of European American tones, and you would hear them speak very properly. And very clearly, all as if they were on the stage, and in the sense that their voice didn't sound natural, in that sense, and that they would be the strongest to, kind of criticize people that weren't able to develop to speak in that same manner. Now, with regards to this, however, groups in many situations don't, in fact, want to adopt the speech of other groups, of a more favored group. In fact, minority group members may, in fact, exhibit reactance by using more distinctive speech from the group that they feel could be an oppressive group. So even more language, even more intensity in regards to using what would be a dialect that would be particular to their group, and that would be against a more favored group, or a group that was in a position to be able to exert more discriminatory practices. And so we do see these situations occur where we see the language actually become really kind of more distinctively different than what would be the cultural standard language. And what also happens with respect to this is that the minority group members, right, will say, you know what, we see what you're doing, and we're not going to go with that. So we're going to adapt our language even more specifically to distinguish ourselves from you. So that's one of the impacts, right? Another impact can be that the members of the favored group can't understand why the other group won't make accommodations. Why they say, hey, why can't you just learn to speak like us? This is the way people should speak, and if you speak like us, you're speaking correctly. If you speak differently, you're speaking incorrectly. We can't understand why you just can't learn to be like us, right? In a sense, to exert the type of power that dominant groups are able to exert, where they say, you either accommodate to us, or it gives us a right to, in fact, continue to discriminate against you, right? In that sense. So we say, if you can't speak this way, then we have a complete right to, in fact, be discriminate because you have the availability to be able to do that. Now, what I want you to do is to have a clear understanding of why we would focus this way with regards to when we're talking about social injustice and communication, because one of the things we want to make sure you understand is that, in fact, communication is in many ways often at the heart of social injustice, and the heart of discrimination, favoring groups over other groups. So we want to be able to also think of, how does communication come into play? What are the shibboleth schemas that we use these days? Where do you see them enacted? Where do you see groups responding to these different shibboleth schemas? I've given you some examples, integrity, of a coming from a television show. It's an HBO show called the Masters of Sex, and in Masters of Sex, you'll see where there's some shibboleth schema work being done. So take a look at those examples. People in the undergraduate class will use these examples to finish and to do major assignment number 1. Thanks. Have a great day.